The Syrian army has routed the last pockets of terrorists south of the capital, Damascus, and civilians are now heading back to the newly liberated cities. For some of them, they've come to terms with their lives again, rebuilding the pieces after the war, but others are still searching for their loved ones who went missing during the conflict.
He fought in a militia supporting the Syrian army. There were 22 soldiers in his assault team. They went into attack on April 22nd. Their group came here, but they got ambushed and captured. ISIL terrorists called me from Mazar's phone and told me they killed him. They sent me photos and took a picture of this thing. They first sent me this picture and then this one. This is Mazar's body. That's Mazar's jacket. They were captured all of a sudden from the ambush. They shot him in the back. Here's one shot. Here's the other. We're looking for his body every day. We come here every day. We will find him. We will.
Breaking overnight now, the Israeli military bracing for a new round of protests along the Gaza border. It has been a Friday afternoon repeatedly going back months now where there has been action, but Hamas has made some news here, and Mike Tobin has the latest on all that. He's in Jerusalem. Mike, what's happening?
Well, Bill, for more than 2 months now, when Palestinians get done with Friday prayers, they've been gathering at the fence that separates Israel from Gaza. Some attempt to rush the fence, and that has been happening with deadly consequences. Let me show you some file video from previous protests as I tell you that the Palestinians are gathering at the fence right now. We've got some information that at least one group has tried to rush the fence, and we've got reports of 3 injuries thus far. Now it is the 3rd Friday in Ramadan. Observant Palestinians go to the mosque. They have their big meal to break the fast, and we'll see how big the crowd gets after that. Things got tense this week when Islamic Jihad and militants in Gaza fired a barrage of mortars into Israel. Israel responded with airstrikes, and that drew rocket teams from both Hamas and Islamic Jihad to fire through the night. Ultimately, Egypt encouraged a ceasefire, which, albeit fragile, has held since Wednesday. And all of this comes as the U.S. has made another diplomatic move that's agitated Palestinians. President Trump is now considering giving the U.S. ambassador to Israel, David Friedman, more control over the U.S. consulate in East Jerusalem. The consulate is responsible for U.S. relations with the Palestinians, both in Gaza and the West Bank. Now, in the past, this consulate has reported directly to the State Department in Washington. Now communication will be filtered through the embassy in Jerusalem, and it's particularly aggravating to Palestinians because the current U.S. ambassador is staunchly pro-Israel and supportive of the West Bank settler movement. I just spoke with a senior Palestinian leader, Dr. Hanan Nashrawi, who said that this shows that the peace efforts are dead, as well as a two-state solution.
It is real. It is flying. And we are going to have it here in the United States in the next few years.
This is it, the Cormorant, a flying vehicle that could not only save American lives on battlefields a world away, but also on highways right here at home.
There's the concept of the golden hour, that in order to maximize survivability in an accident, you need to get to that victim and get that victim evacuated into medical attention within an hour.
The idea for a vehicle that can go where helicopters can't was born out of the 2006 Israel-Hezbollah war, where it took on average 5.5 hours to evacuate wounded Israeli soldiers.
One is the ground-to-air fire. The other is that because of the physical limitations of the helicopter's rotor, it cannot land in a mountainous or obstacle-rich area.
The Cormorant is currently being designed and tested in Israel, with keen interest and support from the Israeli military. But the long-term plan is for production to move to the United States, and for both pilotless and piloted models to be available for military and civilian emergencies.
Disaster response, nuclear, biological, chemical decontamination, a dirty bomb in a city, butting against the wall of a building and rescuing people, and so on. This aircraft can do all of that because it doesn't have the overhead rotors.
Urban German Aeronautics says it hopes to be producing the Cormorant here in the US by 2022. The company calls it a win-win for everyone: Israeli technology, US production, and potentially countless lives saved.
In Spain, shaken by a political crisis this week, Prime Minister Mariano Rajoy was ousted in a no-confidence motion over a corruption scandal. Officials are accused of taking bribes to award government contracts there. It's the first time in modern Spanish history that such a vote has been successful then. Pedro Sanchez was then sworn in as Prime Minister on Saturday. He's a 46-year-old former economics professor and current leader of the Socialist Party. He'd been a rival of the former Prime Minister and was the one who instigated the no-confidence vote in the first place. But now, despite receiving large support from smaller opposition parties, he's still likely to face some major challenges. The Liberal Party has won. They've already been calling for another election, lending their support to the ousted Prime Minister. Sanchez also has to deal with the issue of Catalan independence too. Talking of which, just after he took office, a separatist government was sworn in Catalonia after months of direct rule by Madrid. The new Catalan leader, Quim Torra, gave a speech following vowing to push for the region's independence from Spain. Torra replaces Carles Puigdemont, who fled the country after last year's referendum and is wanted on charges of rebellion. We heard from a Catalan independence activist who says that the region now really needs dialogue with Madrid, not confrontation.
I think that now it's not the key issue to make another referendum. The referendum, it was done, and more than 2 million people was coming to vote, and we must not forget these results. And a new referendum, it's also possible, maybe on a second stage of dialogue, but not now. I think that Mr. Torra must take this on consideration and must act with many care, with negotiations or with the dialogue, if they open dialogue with government Madrid. I think that from side of Madrid they will propose a new status, a new law, a new way to maintain relations between Catalonia and Madrid. But the people here, it's fully wanted independence. I think that a new status will not have the support of the people.
Clearly visible crosses are to go up in some public buildings like courthouses, police stations and city halls like this one here in Bavaria. It's as a new law regarding crucifixes came into effect on the 1st of June. The plan comes courtesy of Bavaria's new president, Markus Söder, and his reasoning is that this is supposed to reinforce Bavarian identity in the face of large-scale immigration.
We want to set a signal of self-assurance in Bavaria. We want to state our Western Christian culture. And that is why clearly we don't get rid of crosses, but hang them up. This is not an attack on others, but only a cultural symbol, which we especially appreciate in Bavaria.
Public opinion shows that almost 60% of Bavarians actually support the move. But when we spoke to people on the streets of Nuremberg, opinion was more finely balanced.
I don't think it's a good idea. Because it has nothing to do with the church. The government is separate than the church, so why should we do the same? I don't think it's a good idea.
It's correct, because it's our tradition, and why not?
On the one hand, we see people wanting to ban the headscarf. On the other, they're forcing people to show the cross. That seems at odds to me.
I don't think Bavarian identity depends on crosses. It is strong in other ways, beer gardens and local traditions.
The cross is part of everyday life for us, but we respect every faith, not just Christianity.
The Bavarian president became the target of more than a few online jokes when he announced this idea. However, those who are charged with actually hanging crucifixes in public buildings, well, they are on side with the plan.
This is not a defensive reaction, but a positive reinforcement of our culture. It does not hurt to point out what our roots are. This cross is a symbol, not only for Christians, but for people living in Bavaria.
But critics say that this goes against Germany's constitutional separation of church and state, and say they want to change the law.
It's a totally wrong decision of the Bavarian government, because as a Bavarian citizen, you can be a Muslim, you can be a Jew, you can be non-religious, you can be an atheist, humanist, for example. And all these people shall now look to the cross. And why is that? We have a strong tradition of a separation of church and state. There has to be clarified whether this mixing up of a religious symbol with secular rooms of a secular state is really compatible with our Bavarian constitution.
There hasn't been any mad rush to hang crucifixes in buildings like the City Hall in Nuremberg just behind me here. The law didn't come with any deadline and is also widely expected to be challenged in Germany's highest court at some point in the future. Peter Oliver, RT, Bavaria.
This is one of the newly erected camps in Paris. It's been set up to shelter around 170 migrants who are amongst the 1,000 or so who are cleared from the canals of Paris during dawn-side raids. Thousands of migrants had been camped along the canals for many, many months, living in squalid conditions with few to no comforts. The mayor of Paris and the interior minister, Gérard Collomb, had been embroiled in a war of words over who was responsible for clearing the camps.
The situation will be repeated indefinitely if measures are not taken by local authorities to prevent the camps from reappearing.
We could have avoided waiting 4 months to find shelter for these people. The suggestion I made to the state was to build and reform a welcome center, which is really the only option possible if we want to avoid the roadside camps. So I'm waiting for the state to get back to me on that.
Now these migrants are being housed in Bois de Boulogne, one of Paris's wealthiest areas, the 16th arrondissement. It's also home to former President Nicolas Sarkozy, PSG's Parc des Princes football stadium, and Roland Garros, which is currently hosting tennis stars from across the globe for the French Open. Some locals aren't over the moon about their new neighbours.
I think the people here are not very pleased that these people are here, because they are afraid that some of them must be very difficult. Some of them are very, very nice, I'm sure, but a little part of them are maybe bad.
You never know how people can react. You can have some people who react very badly and some good. You never know.
Authorities choose not the most hospitable area because it is populated by many old people who are not really open-minded. So I think that this area is not the most welcoming.
We don't see any changes. We don't communicate with migrants because we don't see them at all in the area. So I guess they live autonomously.
This is now the 34th time in 3 years that migrants have been moved in Paris. But the problem seems to be cyclic. It's never ending. Authorities are due to continue the clear-out of camps that emerged along Paris's canals in the next few days. Yet with the capital already overflowing and an estimated 550 extra migrants arriving every week, there seems to be little that the authorities can do to keep a lid on the problem. Charlotte Dubinsky, RT, Paris.
10 days from now, President Trump will meet face-to-face with North Korea's Kim Jong-un in Singapore. The president declared the June 12th summit officially back on after meeting with Kim Jong-un's top aide inside the Oval Office. The ultimate goal, getting the North to give up its nuclear weapons program. Well, for now, the U.S. is keeping its economic stronghold on the regime. But on Friday, the president seemed to soften his tone on the tough sanctions that he has enacted.
I don't even want to use the term maximum pressure anymore, because I don't want to use that term. Because we're getting along, you see the relationship, we're getting along. So it's not a question of maximum pressure, it's staying essentially the way it is. At some point, hopefully a deal for the good of millions of people, a deal will be worked out.
Niall Stanage is a White House columnist for The Hill, and he joins me now from our Washington bureau. Okay, Niall, between the president's sort of softer tone on sanctions and his willingness to let the North, quote, take their time in this process, what do you think ultimately the White House wants to accomplish on June 12th?
Well, it's been quite a peculiar hokey-pokey diplomatic dance, this, hasn't it? We're in, we're out, we're in, we're out. And now it's back in and it's back on again. I think the White House wants this meeting. I think it wants the photo opportunity of the two leaders there. And I think we're seeing from President Trump an acceptance that it will be a longer process before any actual agreement is accomplished. So I think there is some realistic expectation there, but definitely they still want the symbolic victory of the meeting.
Now, I've got to say, I've never heard anybody talk about the summit as the hokey pokey, so that may be a first. But so we were talking about South Korea, you know, their involvement in all of this. The South Korean defense minister said that the international community should not question Kim Jong-un's motives at this point. Yet American lawmakers like House Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, they've done exactly that. Why have they been so skeptical of this summit and almost don't share the same sort of optimism that the White House does?
Basically, I think because their thinking is more aligned with the foreign policy establishment in both parties here. That establishment is very distrustful of North Korea. It has seen a history of North Korea failing to follow through on things that it had appeared to promise during past administrations, both Republican and Democratic. President Trump, I think, clearly sees the idea of change coming by virtue of his very unconventional approach. I think he would see any movement as something that not only is a good thing for the United States and the world, but would also be, in his mind, a vindication of his approach over the more cautious approach favoured by other people, including some in his own party.
So in addition to North Korea, we've also got talks on tariffs this week. We got key Republicans criticizing the president's decision to impose these new tariffs on allies of ours, Canada, Mexico, European allies. Here's what the president said defending the fallout on Friday.
They're our allies, but they take advantage of us. We're going to straighten out trade. The trade is going to be easy. And other countries understand. You know, when I talk to them, they look at me, and this is in closed doors, not for you people. And they essentially say, we can't believe we've gotten away with this for so long.
Any way of gauging how this trade dispute could help or hurt Republicans in midterms as they're trying to sort of campaign on a really strong economy?
It is a danger for them, I think. There's something of a danger of sort of standing on your own shovel here, because, as you say, the economy is going well. If this tariff battle were to develop into a full-blown trade war, then many people, including Republicans, think that that could be very damaging for the American economy. It is, though, a complicated issue, Rena, because in some of the states in the Midwest, in Ohio, in Pennsylvania, there are, I think, people on both parties who favour the tariffs on steel and aluminium because they see that as a way to resuscitate the manufacturing base in those kind of states. So it's a complicated political calculus, but certainly not without risk for the president and his party.
And we know in the coming weeks the DOJ Inspector General is expected to release findings on how the FBI handled the Clinton email investigation. He's also reviewing the Russia investigation. Do you get a sense of what kind of impact these reports will have?
They will have an impact, but I'm not sure how much it will be unpredictable. I suspect it will go along fairly predictable battle lines. The Inspector General is very highly thought of by many people. He seems to be fairly good at resisting political pressure. The problem is that everything regarding the DOJ at the moment is so politicized. He might produce a nuanced report, but there's not much nuance in war, and we're in the middle of a war of words about the DOJ and its integrity and how that impacts the Trump administration. So that's the danger.
Niall Stanage in Washington, who knows a hokey pokey very well, along with foreign affairs and Washington politics. Niall, thank you for joining us.
Everything, Rena. Thank you.
It's all in one, my friend. Thank you for joining us.
Okay. We're following the latest developments on the Trump administration's tariff decision. The U.S. is imposing tariffs of up to 25% on steel and 10% on aluminum imports from some of our closest allies, including the European Union, Canada, and Mexico. The U.S. is now bracing for retaliation, and there's growing fears this could trigger a global trade war. For more on this, let's bring in CBSN contributor Willis Sparks. He writes for Signal, a newsletter produced by G0 Media. Good to see you.
Good to see you, as always.
So, Looking at the big picture here, what's the big takeaway from President Trump's decision here?
The big takeaway for me is, first of all, when you throw a punch to start a fight, no one knows how far that fight is going to go. In this case, President Trump is throwing punches at the European Union and Canada and Mexico after already throwing punches at China. He's basically trying to fight everyone at once.
This is mutually assured destruction here.
Well, it's
or asymmetrical.
It's the idea that, you know, normally when a U.S. president comes into some kind of conflict, whether it's a real conflict or a trade conflict, you know, they brag about their allies. We've got all these allies. You remember all of the Bush administration coalitions in Iraq, etc. And basically what Trump is saying is we don't need any allies. We're going to do this. We're number one. We're going to take this fight on ourselves, and we're perfectly capable of fighting everyone all at once. Now, is he right? We'll see. I mean, his point of view is, look, you have to throw punches sometimes, because if the rest of the world knows that you never throw punches, they are going to take advantage of you. They're going to put barriers in place that you don't have in place on your side. It's not fair to American workers. But whether this kind of fight works out benefiting American workers is an open question.
The president campaigned on bringing fair trade practices as he sees them to the United States. The question I guess I have is, could this kind of action damage our relationship with allies when it comes, for example, to what's happening in Syria? To use one example.
It already has. I mean, maybe not necessarily on Syria, but it already has damaged the relationship in that President Trump, particularly when you're talking about Europe, is so unpopular in Europe that it becomes more difficult for a European leader to be seen to cooperate with President Trump. You pay a political price for cooperating with President Trump. Now, I don't want to overstate this because it's in the interests of the U.S. and European governments to cooperate on cyber attack defense, on counterterrorism. That continues. But to the extent that President Trump is presenting himself as a guy that's willing to use the same trade tools against our European allies and Canada and Mexico that he uses on China, he's poisoning the well a little bit that makes the politics a lot more complicated for European leaders.
Reported comments by the Pope could signal a major shift for the Catholic Church and its views on homosexuality. A survivor of clerical sexual abuse, Juan Carlos Cruz, says that when he told the Pope he was gay, the Pope responded, and I'm quoting now, "God made you like this, God loves you like this." For more, I'm joined by CNN's Vatican correspondent Delia Gallagher. Delia, what more do we know about this potentially very extraordinary conversation?
Well, Wolf, that's right. Juan Carlos Cruz met with Pope Francis at the end of April. He was invited to the Vatican by the Pope because he's a survivor of clerical sex abuse in Chile, and they were discussing that. And in the course of that conversation, Juan Carlos Cruz says when they talked about him being gay, the Pope told him it doesn't matter. God loves you like this. God made you like this. The Vatican this morning, Wolf, says they don't comment normally on the Pope's private conversations, although it's notable that they didn't issue a denial or a correction, which they sometimes do if they feel that the comments are very far afield from what the Pope might be thinking. But the point of the whole discussion is that if the Pope were to say, God created you like this, it's going beyond what any Pope has ever said before on the question of gays, and doesn't square so easily with the traditional Catholic Church teaching that homosexuality, the inclination to homosexuality as their language, is disordered. So it opens up a whole host of other questions on the Catholic position on gays. So this is the question that is being debated right now amongst many. Of course, one interpretation, Wolf, is simply that the Pope was having a private conversation with a gay man doing what Pope Francis does, which is offering some pastoral support to him. Another interpretation, and we've seen in times in the past, is that the Pope doesn't mind if these comments get out into the public because it's a way of changing the public perception on an issue without, however, having to change the official church teaching, which Pope Francis has given no indication he intends to do, Wolf.
All right, potentially very, very significant. The Pope saying, God made you like this, God loves you like this. Delia Gallagher, thank you very, very much.
The Pope has held an important meeting with a delegation of the Orthodox Patriarchate of Moscow, led by Hilarion of Volokolamsk, the chairman of External Church Relations. The Moscow Patriarchate is one of the most reluctant to dialogue with Rome, but the Pope received them with open arms.
Davanti a voi io vorrei ribadire, in modo speciale davanti a te, caro fratello, e davanti a voi, che la Chiesa Cattolica mai permetterà che dai suoi nasca un atteggiamento di divisione. Noi mai ci permetteremo di fare questo. Non lo voglio. A Mosca c'è un solo, in Russia c'è un solo patriarcato, il vostro. Noi non avremo un altro.
In addition, he asked Catholics not to intervene in internal matters of the Russian Orthodox Church.
La Chiesa Cattolica, le Chiese Cattoliche non devono immischiarsi nelle cose interne della Chiesa Ortodossa russa, neppure nelle cose politiche. Questo è il mio atteggiamento e l'atteggiamento della Santa Sede oggi. E coloro che si immischiano non obbediscono la Santa Sede.
It's a gesture of goodwill by the Pope with the Patriarch of Moscow, on which the majority of the Orthodox in the world depend. Pope Francis has invited all Christian patriarchs to pray together for peace on July 7th in Bari. It's not known yet if Kirill, the Patriarch of Moscow, will also participate.